A teenage girl from a struggling North Dakota family vanished one spring night in 1981, leaving behind her savings, her personal belongings, and every sign she fully intended to come home. In the hours before she disappeared, conflicting accounts placed her at dinner, at a park, and possibly at a crowded apartment party, always in the company of a mysterious older man no one in her life ever heard of until she was gone. Rumors, dead-end leads, and a trail of troubled men swirled around the case, yet the investigation barely moved. Welcome to Without a Trace. I'm your host, Jalyn. Every file holds a mystery. Every story deserves to be heard. This is Barb's story. Barbara Cotton was born on November 10, 1965 in Tiago, North Dakota, to Louise and John Cotton. Barbara, who went by Barb to most who knew her, was the seventh of 8 children born to Louise and John. There was a 19-year difference between the oldest child and the youngest. The Cotton family lived on a rural piece of property in a one-bedroom trailer. There were what could only be described as 3 sheds that were attached to the trailer home. Still not spacious, but they had what they needed. Although John Cotton had decent employment at Montana-Dakota Utilities, money was tight to feed and take care of 8 children, as during this time Louise was a homemaker. When Barb was about 7 years old, her parents divorced and her mother moved to Williston, North Dakota with the 3 youngest children, Barb, Kent, and Kathy. Barb's brother Kent was a year older and her sister Kathy was 2 years younger. At this point, the 5 older children were adults and were already living on their own. As a single mother, Louise had to work a lot to make ends meet. When they first moved to Williston, the children had a babysitter for a couple of years, but eventually the children were expected to take care of themselves while Louise was working. In some ways, Barb, Kent, and Kathy had to grow up fast. Barb worked at Country Kitchen and had savings stashed away from Social Security benefits she received after her father passed away in 1978. She was saving money to get her own apartment when she turned 16. Diane, although an adult and having a family of her own, remembers seeing her siblings often during the summer months. Barb would visit and stay weekends at her sister's home, and they just had fun. When Barb blossomed into a teenager, she always wanted to be with friends. Barb was described as timid, but a social butterfly at the same time, the kind of child that was quiet until you got to know her. She was said to have a bubbly personality, and she cared deeply and was always there when you needed her. Barb was an animal lover of all kinds. She had 2 really close friendships during this time, Sandy Evanson and Diane. Sandy and Barb, along with Barb's siblings, became fast friends when the Cotton family moved to Williston. Sandy's mother and Louise also became good friends. Though Sandy was 1 year older than Barb, so when Sandy went off to high school, the pair grew apart in some ways. They started their own friend circles, but they never lost touch, still hearing from each other at least once a week. Diane was very close to Barb, and the 2 were nearly inseparable. They told each other everything and spent the majority of their free time together. Diane said they loved going to coffee shops and watching scary movies together. Barb spent a lot of time at Diane's house, and at one point, Barb wanted to move in with Diane and her family, but Louise wouldn't allow it. Diane was getting married in July of 1981, and Barb was set to be her maid of honor. However, Barb never got to wear her new dress, and Louise kept it for many years, ultimately giving it to her granddaughter, who still has it to this day. In hindsight, Diane realized that the week leading up to April 11, 1981, she and Barb were not attached at the hip like usual. She didn't seem to notice at the time, and nothing stuck out to her as being different. Today, however, Diane believes something during that week changed, but she isn't sure what it could have been. Barb was last seen on April 11, 1981, in the company of her new boyfriend, 21-year-old Stacy Werder. The The timeline leading up to Barb's disappearance isn't precise, clear, complete, or verifiable. It is a widely shared story that Barb walked into Recreation Park, but this might not have been the last time she was seen. That evening, Barb grabbed dinner with Stacy and another friend at Cakes and Cones. Some reports state that Luis was also at this dinner. In some accounts, it is reported that after dinner, her boyfriend offered to walk her home, but Barb declined. Stacy watched as Barb walked into Recreation Park, which was 5 blocks from her home. She was never seen or heard from again. Though this might not have been Barb's last sighting. There was a party on the night Barb disappeared, and it seems likely that Barb was in attendance. In the months following her daughter's disappearance, Louise frequently called the party's host to ask if there was anything at all that the girl could remember about that night. The girl and her sister recall Barb attending a party at their apartment, but they would admit that it was hard to say with absolute certainty that it was on the night Barb disappeared. However, they do feel very strongly that it was. The girls recall that Barb attended the party with a boy, and after seeing photos, they think she was with Stacy. One sister remembers Barb leaving with Stacy, and later Stacy returned to the party alone. She recalls asking him where Barb went, and he gave a vague answer of Barb getting a ride. The other sister recalls that Barb's boyfriend stopped at the apartment the following day, demanding to know where Barb was. Louise was immediately worried when Barb didn't come home. In the early morning hours of April 12th, Louise called Sandy to see if she knew where Barb was. Sandy had been roller skating that evening at Wheel a while, and when they closed for the night at midnight, she walked home. She hadn't been with Barb that night. Sandy's mother and Louise were good friends, and Sandy remembers Louise talking about Barb's disappearance. Sandy would later learn that Louise actually attended the dinner with Barb and Stacy. Louise told them that she had been happy because the interaction had gone well. Louise and Barb had been arguing around that time about Barb dating and partying, but the tide seemed to shift that day. This was the first time Sandy heard anything about Barb having a boyfriend. Sandy wasn't the only friend left in the dark about Barb's boyfriend. Barb's best friend, Diane, believes she would have been the first person to know about Barb having a new boyfriend, and even she had no knowledge of this guy. The news that Barb had a boyfriend was shocking for her friends to hear. Barb's closest friends don't recall her having a boyfriend, and no one besides Louise recalls knowing that Stacy even existed. Louise was hitting dead end after dead end in her search for her daughter. Louise then reached out to Stacy in an attempt to find her daughter. He advised her that Barb told him that she was going to walk home from Cakes and Cones, where the pair had dinner that evening. Stacy watched as Barb walked into Recreation Park and never saw her again. On April 12, 1981, just before 4 p.m., Louise contacted police to report her daughter missing. Louise told police everything she knew, that she last saw Barb in the company of her new boyfriend, 21-year-old Stacy, and that later Barb was seen by friends at a friend's house around 10 p.m. on the evening of April 11th. Louise filled police in on her conversation with Stacy and told authorities that she was certain that Stacy knew where Barb was, but he was not being honest about it. The next day, Louise had a new lead for police. She called them again and told them that she thought Barb was with Stacy in Montana at a Pioneer Hotel in room 205. Local law enforcement in Montana followed up on the lead and reported back to the Williston Police Department that Barb was not there. There's nothing that indicates if Stacy was there or not. It's unclear how Louise got this information. She was friends with the owner of Cakes and Cones, so it is presumed that the owner might have known Stacy was headed to Montana, or Stacy could have told Louise himself when he met her. It is believed that Stacy left Williston for Montana within a day or two of Barb's disappearance. It has been confirmed that by June, Stacy was in Montana. It is possible that Stacy already had plans to leave Williston prior to Barb's disappearance. Stacy quickly became a person of interest in Barb's disappearance. Even his sisters believed he had something to do with it based on the way they witnessed him snap into violence in the past. Though the police did little to investigate the possible involvement, Stacy was never questioned by police, nor were those close to him. His sisters assumed that no one needed information from them about their brother, and to their knowledge, their mother also never spoke to anyone about Barb's disappearance. Had law enforcement spoken to Stacy's family or Stacy himself, they may have been more successful in solving Barb's disappearance. Stacy was born on October 5th, 1959 in California. He was remembered by classmates as being very smart and a nice guy. His sisters remember him differently. Stacy's sisters recall episodes where Stacy would become extremely violent in an instant. In the past, he attacked family members, and his sisters have no doubt that he was attempting to kill his target in those situations. The final straw was when he attempted to strangle their father with an extension cord. Stacy was told to leave, and Stacy did just that, never looking back. Stacy went on to join the Navy in 1980, but he was discharged after they diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. After his short time in the military, Stacy became a drifter and hitchhiked everywhere. When he would come home, he told stories about going to places like Canada and Texas. At one point, their brother even accompanied Stacy on the road for a while. On July 15, 1981, Stacy was arrested in Malta, Montana for disorderly conduct. Just a month prior, on June 12th, he had been arrested and served 10 days in Glasgow, Montana for a similar charge. Stacy's sister also mentioned that there was an incident on a nearby reservation where Stacy ended up being beaten and robbed prior to being arrested, but she didn't indicate which arrest that pertained to. After Stacy was arrested on July 15th, he called one of his sisters from jail and told her that he was coming home. She expressed concern that her new dog didn't know him and that it would bite him. Stacy told her that the way he was coming home, it wouldn't matter. He told his sister that he needed her to tell their mother that he loved her and he was sorry for what he had done. Then, Stacy hung himself in jail that night at approximately 1:30 a.m. With police unable to question Stacy and no closer to finding Barb, they moved on with their second person of interest, Frank Della Pina. Frank was working and living in Williston at the time of Barb's disappearance. Within weeks of Barb disappearing, he had what seems to be a mental breakdown. He was hospitalized on May 1st, where he saw a psychiatrist and underwent observation. He was released the next day. On May 5th, Frank hooked up his camper to his white van and headed for Rawlins, Wyoming. While traveling, Frank started what seemed to be a desperate mission to lure women and children into his trailer. He would tell them that he needed to rehome a husky puppy and that they had to come inside the trailer to help him find it. He failed numerous times before reaching Rawlins. However, once he reached Rawlins, Frank successfully abducted 2 young girls, aged 9 and 12, from a busy intersection in broad daylight. Their bodies were found the following morning off an interstate exit located 54 miles from Rawlins. Because Frank had tried so many times in so many towns, it didn't take long for authorities to identify him. On May 9th, Frank parked at a KOA in Garden City, Kansas, where he stayed for 5 nights before heading towards Colorado. Once in Colorado, he applied for a job with the same company he worked for in Williston. Frank urged the foreman to call his old boss, and when he did, he was told to get rid of Frank and call back. He sent Frank to go get some dinner and return after. The foreman quickly called back and was informed that Frank was wanted for the Rawlins murders and that he needed to contact law enforcement. The police devised a plan, with the help of the foreman, to arrest Frank. The foreman was to have Frank ride with him to pick up some permits, and they would be pulled over in what would seem like a routine traffic stop. The arrest was uneventful, and Frank did not resist. While in the Lincoln County Jail in Hugo, Colorado, Frank didn't eat for almost a week. A jailer claimed that Frank said he didn't deserve to eat after what he had done. Then one day, he just started eating. He refused to sign the papers that would extradite him and wrote a long and grandiose suicide letter for the media, claiming that he was set up and that he was innocent. On May 22, 1981, Frank hung himself in his jail cell. Authorities could never connect Frank to Barb, but he was named a person of interest nonetheless. The third person of interest was one of Barb's brothers, Frank Cotton. Frank was the second born of 8 siblings, and in 1981, he was about 32 years old and living in Williston. He stayed at Louise's house periodically throughout the years and dropped in frequently when he wasn't staying there. Frank likely ended up on the list of persons of interest due to accusations of sexual abuse by family members. Some family members believed their mother would have covered up for Frank. Some also believed that Louise stopped looking for Barb after Frank was diagnosed with terminal cancer. She legally declared Barb deceased in 1998. shortly after she began caring for Frank. Louise had a double headstone placed on Frank's plot with Barb's name on it. This stood out as a bit odd to Barb's family, as Frank wasn't the only child that passed away after Barb disappeared. In 1953, their brother Ralph died at just 5 months old, and in 1993, another brother, Joseph, passed away. No remains have been found, and there have been no arrests made in connection with Barb's disappearance. There seems to be extremely little, if any, documentation that police conducted much of an investigation. Detectives have been unable to confirm whether a dinner occurred on the night Barb disappeared, and there are reasonable doubts that Stacy was her boyfriend. Detectives have confirmed that Barb's mother is the only person who places Stacy in Williston at the time. Additionally, no one believes Louise would be the first person to know about a new guy Barb was interested in. None of Barb's friends or siblings heard anything about Stacy or a new boyfriend at all until after Barb disappeared. Barb's case was initially treated as a runaway situation. Barb's family and friends never agreed that Barb would run away. When Barb disappeared, she left a paycheck at home along with all of her money in her savings account, and she had no personal belongings with her. Barb was turning 16 in November, which was only 6 months away, and she had saved up enough money to get an apartment. Plus, Barb had many safe places between her friends and siblings that she could go if she ever needed to. Barb was missing during North Dakota's first oil boom. Williston had experienced a dramatic influx of drifters looking for work. With this, it also brought increases in criminal activity, such as sexual assault, human trafficking, and gun crimes. It is possible Barb was met with foul play from one of the drifters seeking high-paying work. The police department receives a few calls and tips about Barb's case each year. While the law enforcement has followed up on them, they have hit brick wall after brick wall. Barb's mother, Louise, passed away in 2004, leaving any questions for her out of the question. Thank you for listening to Without a Trace. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into Barb's disappearance. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and follow Without a Trace on social media. And join me next week as I dive into another case.